So welcome everybody. And as I said earlier, I'm sorry for the early time, but we're just trying to keep in mind the people who are going to Mincha or Marv. And so for a week or two, we keep it at 4:30. Then I think we can go later. Maybe that's more convenient for everybody. It's hard to find a time that everybody likes because we're Jewish. So everybody has their own particular recommendations. In any case, thanks to everybody for tuning in. I'm going to try to take off my watch because I want to end on schedule because I have a Hachnasat Sefer Torah going on in about a half hour. So I want to try to end on time. All right. I want to talk about something that is, I think it's a fascinating subject. I may have touched upon this in the past, but I think in any case, it does bear repeating. We are in the Parsha of Truma. Truma means essentially a donation. In the Parsha sheet, I talk about why it says you shall take a truma as opposed to you shall give a donation, but that's another subject. But I want to talk about something else, and that is the title that I put forward, and that is, what is the shape of Judaism? When you look at the items in this Parsha, we're going to detail all the different objects that are in the Mishkan, later to be put in the Beit HaMikdash. And in the next week's Parsha, then we're going to talk about the clothes that the Kohanim wore as they went through their various rituals and karbanot. But let's focus a bit on these objects. Something stands out when we start to look at the different objects, both in the Mishkan and in general Jewish life. We start off with essentially the most important object, which is the Aron Kodesh. And some of these objects we are aware of are imitated, so to speak, in our shuls, in the Batei Knesset, where we're putting in the same objects because we are trying to create the image of a Mikdash Ma'at, a miniature sanctuary, so to speak, a miniature Beit HaMikdash, with certain exceptions. You can't imitate everything without getting into all those halachic details, but many of the things, indeed, we do duplicate. And so the Aron Kodesh is something we're all familiar with. And the Aron Kodesh always has on it, except for Tisha B'Av, a cover, a parochet, and it also has a cover, which again, we're not, I dealt with that a little bit in the Parsha sheet, the cover, and at least the Keruvim. But when we start to look at these objects, beginning with the Aron Kodesh, we notice something very interesting. They all, or essentially all of them, are in the form or the shape of a square. So the Aron Kodesh, again, square and a rectangle, they're essentially the same four-edged kind of structure. You see it in the Aron, you see it in the Parochet, you see it in the Shulchan, in the table. You see it actually in the entire Mishkan itself, which was square-shaped. And you see it in virtually all the Jewish objects, not everyone, but most of the Jewish objects that you can think of are in the shape of a square. Think about this for a moment. You look at your tefillin, both the tefillin shel rosh, tefillin shel yad, it is a square. The talit, if you open it up, essentially is a square shape. So is a mezuzah. So is a chuppah, of course. So is a sukkah, also square shaped. The matzah you could have round matzah, but essentially 90+% of the matzah we eat is in the shape of a square. The Megillah, if you would take it out, also essentially in the shape of a square. All of these objects are square shaped. Very few Jewish objects are anything but. Now, you also have in this week's Parsha the menorah. The menorah is clearly not a square, but according to most authorities, the base of the menorah was indeed square. So the branches came out of a square shape. And we have to ask the question, why? Why is the predominance of objects in Jewish life, why is it in the shape of a square? I will come back to that. And by the way, I'm sure you can think of more. You can put it in the chat if you want to, but there are lots of other things we do or objects that we have in Jewish life that also are in the shape of a square. So I want to come back to a very famous commentary and kind of question answer by Rav Soloveitchik. Rav Soloveitchik looked at two different brachot achronot. You know, we have a bracha prior to eating something, and we have a bracha after we eat. Most of those brachot that we say before we eat, they're very short. When you look at the brachot achronot, those two, most of them are reasonably short, except for one. So the Rav said, I want to examine two different brachot and share with you, first of all, my kind of wonderment or confusion, and then answer it as well. So the Rav said, let's look at the bracha, which is said after you eat fruit. And the bracha, and let's say the fruit of Israel, for example, the Sheva Minim, which has a little bit extra, right? And then he said, let's compare that to the bracha that you make after you have bread. So the bracha that you make after you have bread is a very long bracha, and it is filled with all kinds of information. It doesn't just say to God, thank you for the bread. The first paragraph kind of covers that. Then it begins to go off into all kinds of different subjects. If you look at it carefully, it's almost like a walk through Jewish history. It's talking about the Exodus. It's talking about Brit Milah. It's talking about bringing home the nation of Israel to Israel. It's talking about peace. It's talking about Yerushalayim. It's a very poetic and, as we know, very comprehensive blessing. It also has a special zimun, an intro to this bracha, Birkat HaMazon, and no other bracha has that. It's a call to order, Rabotai Nevarech, or in Yiddish, Rabbi Weiss Mervelen Benchen. And that gives it certainly an added honor. It's the only bracha that is biblically required. We learn it from the pasuk in Parshat Ekev, V'achalta v'savata uveirachta. No other bracha has that status. They're all rabbinic. The bracha that's said on fruit of Eretz Yisrael, is very tiny compared to Birkat HaMazon. It does contain a short reference to Israel and Yerushalayim, but none of the other accoutrements that you find in Birkat HaMazon. There's no call to order. It's said very quickly. It's over and done. So the Rav said, when I think about this, I actually, if I was writing these two brachot, I would have done it much differently. Because think about it for a moment. Fruit is something which is a marvelous creation. It's nutritious, it's delicious, it comes in colors. And, you know, you don't really have to do very much work for it. You may do a planting, but you reach out, you can even reach out your door, your window, and there you have the fruit just hanging on a tree. I have a friend, he has a grapefruit tree, and it produces literally hundreds of grapefruits every year. It's an annual, it doesn't have to do anything. I mean, after the first year, it's there. And it's terrific. Bread, however, is something that doesn't come on its own. You know, Rav Dessler asks and says, In the desert, they had man. It was great. We today have a modern day equivalent of man, and that's fruit. You know, the man fell to them. They didn't have to work for it. It was nutritious, delicious. And we have fruit. But bread is different. Bread is something which, yes, you need God's help for it, but we do most of the work. There are 10 steps from the time you have wheat till you make it into the challah that comes on your Shabbat table. And that's work that we do. It's the planting, it's the sowing, it's the reaping, it's the winnowing, it's the threshing, it's the baking, etc., the kneading. And eventually it comes out to be this finished product, the bread. Well, fruit was something that, in a sense, came straight from God. And we didn't do very much. But bread is something that we work very hard for. So, says the Rav, I would have thought that the bracha for fruit should be much longer. It should be praising God. Look what you gave us. And it's just hanging from the tree and it's there for the picking. And we just can't tell you how much we love what you've given to the world, God. The bracha for fruit, he says, should have really waxed poetic. Whereas bread, okay, thank God you gave us the seed and the ability, to work it, but we did most of the work. So why are we praising you on and on and on for something that we did most of the work? So the Rav says, and this is something which was a common theme in much of his writing, and he said, it's precisely because fruit is something that comes with little effort of ours that it doesn't merit the most poetic and the longest bracha. You have to say thank you to Hashem because he gave us the fruit, but it's not the ultimate. Bread represents dafka, specifically, the work between man and God, that you can't get bread just by planting a seed. You have to work hard for it. This is a joint venture between man and God. And anytime man or humanity partners with Hashem and works together to achieve something, that's where real Kedusha, real holiness exists. And that's what makes life meaning. To have something handed to you without your effort, it sounds great, but it doesn't give you real meaning, real purpose. But when you work at something, that brings you great satisfaction. And when you do something together with Hashem and the two of you are partners, that's something unique and something which tells you, I have a place in the universe. I have a purpose. I have meaning, that we need each other. I need Hashem, but he needs me because we're together going to produce this product of bread, which is, of course, the essential foodstuff of life. And that partnership is what makes bread so special and so important that we have the longest by far bracha. I sometimes use the example that if you're a good singer and you go to hear one of the great singers of our time, let's say living or not living, Pavarotti, you go and you hear a concert by Pavarotti and or Helfgott as a chazan, and it's great. And then Helfgott sees you in the audience and he says, I want to hear you sing a song. And you think, wow, that is a fantastic feeling that I'm going to sing in front of Helfgott. But the best feeling of all is when Pavarotti or Helfgott call you down and say, let's do a duet, the two of us, let's sing together. That's something that really is earth-shaking. And that's something memorable. Says the Rav, this is the idea of bread. And bread represents this union, this co-working relationship between humanity and God, and that is unbeatable. So now we come back to our original question about the square shape of things in the Jewish universe. So this is a comment by Rav Hirsch. He says, what is the default shape of the universe? The default shape of the universe is round. The sun is round, the moon is round, the planets, the stars, fruit, most of it, an orange, an apple, most of the fruit itself is round. You see that a snowflake or a raindrop falls to earth, it breaks into a round shape. You see the wind sometimes pick up some, kind of dust. It swirls around, always in a round shape. That's the shape of the universe that comes from God. But what is the shape of Judaism? The shape of Judaism is predominantly square, because something cannot be square naturally. The only way you can get something to be square is if human beings are part of the process. They have to be involved in making that object, and then it can become square. In fact, it says the square shape is a kind of signature. Man was here, because you can't get there any other way. And so says the Rav, this is why specifically that kind of a mystical way, these objects, all or almost all, are in a square shape. They're trying to send the message, the same message of the Birkat HaMazon versus the bracha and fruit, that we are in a partnership with Hashem. We work together. And the Mishkan especially, which was a place where man and God met. Indeed, we call the central part of the Beit HaMikdash, the Mishkan, the Ohel Moed. That's where Moshe went to communicate with Hashem. That was the meeting place. And that was where he heard the message from Shamayim, from Hashem. They met in that place. And by the way, that Ohel was also square. If you think about the tent of Abraham, it was a square shape. It was open on all four sides to see in every direction. So the Mishkan, the Beit HaMikdash, was meant to be a place where man or humanity and God can meet, can come together. Thus, this very, I think, beautiful, brilliant idea that not by accident are the multitude of Jewish objects square. They're that way in order to send a message that we have to work together with Hashem. That in a sense, although God doesn't really need anything, in a sense, he created a need so that man and God can come together. And everything that happens significantly in Jewish life is a result of this partnership, not God acting alone, not man acting alone, but when we act together. And that's why, just as perhaps the best example really to conclude with, that when it comes time for the redemption, for the Geula, it begins, yes, the message of Hashem is in the burning bush, but Moshe has to turn aside and he has to actually make the effort to go and see what's happening and hear Hashem and begin this process. And later on, of course, we know that when it comes time for the Kriyat Yamsuf, it doesn't happen until somebody acts. Nachshon jumps into the water and splits the sea. There has to be this communal or this dual action by Hashem and by us. And that's how miracles get done. They don't get done on their own. There are exceptions to the rule, but essentially, that's the rule. So in this famous phrase that Moshe recites to the people, Hashem yilachem lachem va'atem tacharishun, which we usually translate, God will do the fighting for you and you will be silent. So Hashem contradicts that and says, no, don't tell the people to do nothing. Daber el bnei Yisrael v'yisau. Tell the people, keep moving, right? and they move, and that's when Achshon jumps into the water. But the Hasidim have a beautiful play on words on this phrase. Hashem yilachem lachem. Hashem will make the bread. Yilachem, the root word of fighting or milchama is lechem. Hashem will make the lechem, va'atem tacharishun. But you have to do the plowing. If you don't do the plowing, there ain't going to be no bread. And that's the message Hashem is sending throughout history. Things happen when people get involved. Perhaps if Herzl never would have come along and never would have promoted the idea of Jewish state, who knows? Who knows if there would be one today? But there's no reason to assume that it's going to happen automatically. These things happen when we come together to Hashem and say, I can do this with you. If you help me, if you're there with me, I can do it. And this is a basic principle of Jewish life and Jewish history. And this is why the shape of Judaism essentially is square. It's sending that fantastic message that when we work together, we can accomplish anything. And that is exactly why Hashem gave us the ability to be not on necessarily the level of Hashem, but a kind of junior partner. When we work together, then indeed we can do wonders. So thank you to everybody for tuning in. And I believe next week we'll be at the same time. After that, we're going to try to go a little bit later. Thanks to Yossi for being the host. Everybody have a wonderful, peaceful Shabbat. And again, wishing for all of our brave soldiers that they have victory, that they are safe, and that those who are injured have a refuah shlema. Thank you again. Shabbat shalom u'brach.
Thank you. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom. Shabbat shalom.